There is a particular kind of thirst that belongs only to a world before clean water arrived simply by turning a handle. Not the mild discomfort of a modern afternoon without a bottle nearby, but a genuine, constant awareness carried by nearly every person throughout most of human history that the water within reach might just as easily make you sick as keep you alive. Welcome back to Velaris Sleep. Tonight, we'll drift gently into a world without treated pipes, without water towers, without the quiet reassurance of a tap that always runs clear. We will step into Roman streets fed by graceful stone aqueducts, into medieval villages gathered each morning around a single shared well, into Viking settlements drawing water from glacial streams, and into colonial American farmhouses depending on rain barrels and hand-dug wells to see a family safely through each season. Consider, for a moment, just how differently water itself must have felt to someone living through these centuries. Water was not an assumption. It was a daily task, a daily calculation, and in many places, a daily risk quietly accepted because there was simply no reasonable alternative. A person filling a bucket at a village well had no way of knowing, in any scientific sense, whether that water carried something dangerous within it. They knew only what generations before them had learned through hard experience, which wells ran sweet and steady, which streams to avoid after heavy rain, which water needed boiling before it touched a child's lips. Tonight, we will travel slowly through many different versions of this old, careful relationship with water. We will begin in ancient Rome, where engineers accomplished something genuinely remarkable, channeling fresh water across great distances through aqueducts whose stone arches still stand today, feeding public fountains that brought clean water within walking distance of nearly every Roman household. We will step into medieval Europe, where entire villages organized their daily rhythm around a shared well, and where water carriers made their living hauling this essential resource from source to doorstep. If this kind of slow history helps ease you towards sleep, consider letting Velaris Sleep join you again tomorrow night, drifting through another quiet corner of the past. We will travel north as well, into the Viking world, where clean water flowed abundantly from glacial streams and mountain springs, a genuine advantage in a landscape otherwise so demanding. We will consider, too, something many people never realize: the surprising way that ale and beer, brewed and consumed daily across much of medieval Europe, functioned as a genuinely safer alternative to untreated water, the brewing process itself offering unintentional protection against the illnesses that plain water so often carried. And we will cross the ocean, finally, into Colonial America, where settlers dug their own wells, collected rainwater in barrels, and learned, sometimes through devastating experience, which water sources could be trusted and which could not. There is no need to hold on to any of these details tonight. There is nothing to remember, nothing to solve, no small test waiting for you tomorrow morning. This is simply a slow, quiet journey through the long history of humanity's most basic and most essential need, offered gently, meant to ease your mind rather than occupy it. Let your body settle now, wherever you are resting this evening. Let your breathing slow and let your eyes grow heavy, the way a well-worn village path grew quiet each evening once the day's water had been carried home. There is nothing required of you right now except to listen and to drift and to let this old, patient history of wells, springs, and careful water carry you gently toward your own deep and peaceful sleep. Chapter 1: Rome's Aqueducts and Public Fountains. Let us begin, as we so often do throughout this long history, in ancient Rome, though tonight our attention turns towards something that ranks among the most genuinely impressive achievements of the entire Roman world: the aqueduct system that carried fresh water across great distances, transforming daily life for millions of people across the empire. Consider, first, the basic challenge Roman engineers faced. Rome itself, along with many of its major cities, had grown far beyond what local springs and the Tiber River alone could reasonably supply, particularly as population density increased and the river itself became increasingly unsuitable for drinking, fouled by waste and runoff from the very city it flowed through. Roman engineers, faced with this genuine problem, developed a solution of remarkable scale and precision, channeling water from distant mountain springs and clean upland sources, sometimes located many miles away, directly into the heart of the city itself. The aqueducts themselves relied on a deceptively simple principle: gravity. Roman engineers calculated, with genuinely impressive precision given the tools available to them, a gentle, continuous downward slope stretching across the entire length of an aqueduct's route, often extending 20, 30, sometimes over 50 miles from source to destination. This slope needed to be gradual enough to prevent water from rushing too quickly and causing damage, yet consistent enough to maintain steady flow across the entire distance, a balance achieved through careful surveying and construction that modern engineers still study with genuine admiration. Consider the physical construction this required. Where the landscape allowed, aqueduct channels ran mostly underground, protected from contamination and temperature extremes alike, covered by simple earth and stone. Where valleys or low ground interrupted this route, Roman engineers built the elevated stone arches most of us picture when we imagine a Roman aqueduct: tall, elegant structures carrying the water channel high above the surrounding terrain, maintaining that same careful, continuous slope even as the ground itself dropped away beneath. There, along the outskirts of Rome, we might picture one of these great aqueducts stretching across the countryside, its rhythmic stone arches marching steadily toward the city, water flowing silently and continuously within the covered channel running along its top. Local farmers and travelers passing beneath these arches would have grown entirely accustomed to their presence. This massive infrastructure simply part of the everyday landscape, its true scale and engineering sophistication perhaps taken for granted by those who lived alongside it daily. Once this water finally reached Rome itself, it entered a genuinely sophisticated distribution system. Water flowed first into large collection basins, then through a network of pipes, many made from lead, though also from terracotta or wood, depending on the specific application, directing this precious resource toward its various destinations throughout the city. Public fountains represented perhaps the most significant of these destinations, structures positioned throughout Roman neighborhoods specifically to provide ordinary residents, regardless of wealth, with reliable access to clean water within reasonable walking distance of their homes. Consider, for a moment, the genuine social significance this system carried. A Roman aqueduct did not simply serve the wealthy elite, though wealthy households certainly enjoyed additional private connections unavailable to poorer residents. Public fountains, by contrast, represented something closer to a shared civic resource, water available freely to any resident willing to walk to the nearest fountain and carry water home in whatever vessel their household possessed. This arrangement meant that even Rome's poorest residents, living in the crowded upper floors of the multi-story apartment buildings that housed much of the city's population, could access clean water without the genuine danger of drawing from a contaminated well or the increasingly polluted Tiber itself. There, At one of these public fountains during the ordinary bustle of a Roman morning, we might picture a scene repeated countless times throughout the city each day. A woman arrives carrying an empty clay vessel, joining others already gathered, some filling their own containers, others simply pausing to drink directly from the fountain's steady flow. Conversation likely passed easily in such moments, neighbors exchanging news and gossip while waiting their turn, this daily errand functioning as something of a social gathering point, woven naturally into the practical necessity of collecting water. It is worth considering, too, the sheer scale of engineering knowledge this system required and helped advance. Roman engineers understood principles of hydraulics, pressure, and flow, with a sophistication that would not be matched again in Europe for many centuries following Rome's eventual decline. The architect and engineer Vitruvius, whose broader architectural writings we touched upon during our earlier exploration of Roman heating systems, also documented considerable knowledge regarding proper aqueduct construction, water quality assessment, and pipe materials, reflecting just how seriously Roman society approached this essential infrastructure. Consider, as well, the genuine attention Roman engineers paid toward water quality itself, understanding, even without any modern scientific framework for germ theory, that certain water sources produced healthier outcomes than others. Roman writers frequently commented on the relative quality of different water sources, noting which springs produced particularly clear, pleasant-tasting water, and expressing genuine concern regarding water that appeared cloudy, carried unusual odors, or came from sources known to cause illness among those who drank it regularly. This practical observation, refined across generations much as we have witnessed throughout every chapter of this long history, allowed Roman engineers to prioritize genuinely superior water sources when planning new aqueduct routes. There is something worth reflecting on here regarding just how thoroughly this system shaped daily Roman life. Consider a Roman household's morning routine, incomplete without the necessary errand to a nearby public fountain, water carried home in whatever vessels the family possessed. This simple task woven so thoroughly into daily rhythm that it likely required little conscious thought, much as we might not consciously consider the effort behind our own modern water access today. Consider, too, how this aqueduct system extended beyond Rome itself, carried outward across the empire, as Roman engineering knowledge and administrative reach expanded into new territories. Roman settlements throughout what is now France, Spain, North Africa, and Britain often received their own aqueduct systems, sometimes considerably smaller in scale than Rome's own network, yet reflecting this same fundamental commitment to providing reliable, clean water access to Roman citizens, regardless of where within the empire they happened to live. There, in a Roman provincial town far from the capital itself, we might picture a similar scene unfolding, a local aqueduct, perhaps more modest than Rome's grand structures yet built according to the same fundamental engineering principles, delivering clean water to public fountains where local residents gathered each morning. This same essential daily rhythm repeated across the empire's vast geographic reach. It is worth acknowledging, too, that this remarkable system, however impressive, was not without genuine limitations. Lead pipes, while effective for water distribution, carried their own health concerns that Roman engineers understood only partially, if at all, according to modern medical understanding. And the system's maintenance required significant ongoing investment and skilled labor, meaning that periods of political instability or reduced resources could genuinely compromise water quality and availability, a vulnerability that would prove genuinely significant as Rome's broader political stability eventually declined. Consider, finally, a Roman evening settling over the city, its aqueducts continuing their silent, steady work regardless of the hour, water flowing continuously from distant mountain springs toward public fountains that would greet residents again with the following morning's first light. This system, remarkable in its scale and engineering sophistication, represented genuine human ingenuity applied toward one of civilization's most basic and essential needs, a achievement that would not be matched again in much of Europe for well over 1,000 years following Rome's eventual decline. As we prepare to leave behind this consideration of Roman aqueducts and their genuine engineering achievement, let us carry forward our appreciation for just how thoroughly this system shaped daily Roman life, providing a level of reliable water access that many subsequent European societies would struggle to match for many centuries afterward. We turn next toward medieval Europe, where this Roman engineering legacy gradually faded, replaced by a considerably more modest, community-centered approach built around the shared village well. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the steady, silent flow of that ancient Roman aqueduct, its water still moving quietly through stone channels built so many centuries ago, and let yourself drift onward, slowly, into the next chapter of this long and peaceful history. Chapter 2: The Medieval Village. Well, let us leave behind now the grand stone arches of Roman aqueducts and travel forward through the centuries into medieval Europe, where the sophisticated engineering we just explored had largely faded from memory in most regions, replaced by a considerably more modest, though genuinely essential solution: the shared village well, standing at the center of countless medieval communities as one of the most important gathering points in daily life. Consider, first, just how thoroughly medieval Europe had lost access to the kind of large-scale water infrastructure Rome once maintained. Following Rome's decline, the specialized engineering knowledge required to build and maintain aqueducts largely disappeared from much of Western Europe, and most medieval communities found themselves relying instead on considerably more local, more modest water sources, wells dug by hand, natural springs, and nearby streams or rivers, each carrying its own particular advantages and genuine risks. The village well itself represented a significant undertaking for any medieval community to establish. Digging a well deep enough to reach reliable groundwater required genuine labor and, importantly, genuine knowledge regarding where such water might actually be found. Medieval communities often relied on individuals who had developed a particular skill for locating promising well sites, sometimes through careful observation of local vegetation and terrain, sometimes through methods we would today consider closer to folk tradition than reliable science, dowsing with a forked stick being perhaps the most commonly recorded example, a practice whose actual effectiveness remains debated even now, though it was widely trusted throughout much of medieval Europe. Consider, for a moment, the physical construction of a typical medieval well once a suitable location had been identified. Workers would dig steadily downward, often lining the well's walls with stone as they progressed, both to prevent the surrounding earth from collapsing inward and to help keep the water itself somewhat cleaner than an unlined dirt shaft might allow. This work required genuine skill and no small amount of danger, workers laboring in an increasingly confined, dark space as the well deepened, dependent on ropes and baskets to remove excavated soil and stone, and on whatever primitive but effective methods existed for ensuring adequate air circulation within the deepening shaft. There, at the center of a modest medieval village, we might picture this well once completed, its stone lining rising slightly above ground level, topped perhaps with a simple wooden frame supporting a pulley system, allowing a bucket to be lowered down to the water's surface and drawn back up again without requiring someone to physically descend into the well itself for every single use. This structure, however simple by our own modern standards, represented genuine communal investment and ongoing responsibility, since a village well required regular maintenance, periodic cleaning, and careful protection from contamination if it was to remain a reliable, trustworthy water source for the entire community depending upon it. Consider the particular daily rhythm this well established within medieval village life. Water collection represented an essential, recurring task for nearly every household, and the well itself naturally became a genuine social gathering point, much as we observed regarding Roman public fountains in our previous chapter, though operating on a considerably smaller, more intimate community scale. Women, who typically bore primary responsibility for household water collection throughout much of medieval Europe, would gather at the well multiple times throughout a typical day, filling wooden buckets or clay vessels, exchanging news and conversation while waiting their turn. This daily errand woven thoroughly into the broader social fabric of village life. There, gathered around this well on an ordinary morning, we might picture several women engaged in exactly this routine, their conversation moving easily between practical household matters and broader village news. Children perhaps playing nearby while their mothers completed this essential task. This scene, repeated countless times across countless medieval villages throughout many centuries, represented far more than simple water collection, functioning as a genuine information network through which important news, local gossip, and practical advice passed naturally between neighbors gathered for this shared, necessary purpose. It is worth considering, too, the particular role certain individuals played within this broader system of medieval water access. Specifically, the water carriers who made their living hauling water from wells or nearby rivers to households unable or unwilling to collect their own supply. This occupation appears throughout medieval historical records, particularly within larger towns and cities where population density made individual household water collection considerably more burdensome, and where wealthier residents might reasonably pay someone else to handle this physically demanding daily task. Consider a medieval water carrier making his rounds through a bustling town, wooden yoke balanced carefully across his shoulders, a full bucket suspended from each end, moving steadily between the town's central well or nearby river and the various households that depended on his daily deliveries. This work required genuine physical stamina, water being remarkably heavy in the quantities a household required for cooking, cleaning, and drinking, and water carriers typically made numerous trips throughout a single day to meet their customers' ongoing needs. There is something worth reflecting on here regarding the genuine trust this system required. A household purchasing water from a carrier depended entirely on that individual's judgment and honesty regarding water quality, trusting that he drew from reliable, relatively clean sources rather than whatever water happened to be most convenient, regardless of its safety. This trust, built gradually through ongoing relationships between water carriers and their regular customers, reflects a broader pattern we have witnessed throughout this entire history: the essential role personal reputation and accumulated community trust played in managing genuine uncertainty regarding matters as fundamental as water safety. Consider, too, the genuine variation in water quality medieval communities encountered depending on their particular local circumstances. A village well drawing from deep, naturally filtered groundwater might provide genuinely safe, clean water year after year, while a community relying primarily on a nearby river or stream faced considerably greater risk, particularly following heavy rainfall that might wash contamination from upstream sources, including, in many unfortunate cases, waste from other communities or livestock situated further upriver. There, along a medieval river serving as a community's primary water source, we might picture residents watching the water's appearance carefully after a significant storm, understanding through accumulated practical experience that water appearing unusually cloudy or carrying visible debris likely carried greater risk than the clearer water typical during drier periods. This kind of practical observation, refined across generations much as we witnessed regarding Roman water quality assessment, represented the primary tool available to medieval communities for managing water safety, since no scientific understanding of waterborne illness existed to guide more systematic precautions. It is worth acknowledging, too, that despite this careful, accumulated practical wisdom, medieval communities experienced genuine, sometimes devastating outbreaks of illness, traceable, at least in part, to contaminated water sources, though medieval understanding typically attributed such outbreaks to other causes entirely. Foul air, divine punishment, or various other explanations reflecting the genuine limits of medieval medical knowledge we explored during our earlier chapter regarding pre-modern medicine. Consider, finally, a medieval village well standing quiet during the deep hours of night, its daytime bustle of women and water carriers replaced by genuine stillness. The well itself resting until morning would once again bring residents gathering for this same essential daily task. This simple structure, dug painstakingly by hand and maintained through ongoing communal effort, represented the genuine foundation of daily medieval life, a foundation considerably more modest than Rome's grand aqueducts, yet no less essential to the communities who depended upon it. As we prepare to leave behind this consideration of medieval wells and water carriers, let us carry forward our appreciation for just how thoroughly this simple structure shaped daily rhythm, social connection, and genuine practical wisdom throughout medieval village life. We turn next toward a particularly interesting dimension of medieval water safety, examining the surprising and genuinely significant role that ale and beer played as a safer alternative to plain water across much of medieval Europe. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the quiet stillness of that medieval village well, its stone walls holding the day's accumulated warmth, even as darkness settles over the surrounding village, and let yourself drift onward, slowly, into the next chapter of this long and peaceful history. Chapter 3: Ale, Beer, and the Unintentional Safety of Fermentation. Let us turn our attention now towards something that might, at first consideration, seem to sit somewhat apart from a history focused primarily on water itself, yet which reveals a genuinely fascinating and important dimension of how medieval Europe managed the persistent uncertainty surrounding water safety we explored in our previous chapter. The widespread daily consumption of ale and beer, consumed not merely for pleasure or ceremony, but as a genuinely safer alternative to plain water for a great many people throughout medieval society. Consider, first, just how thoroughly ale and beer were woven into ordinary medieval daily life, consumed regularly by men, women, and children alike, at every meal, throughout the working day, in quantities that might genuinely surprise us, given our own modern associations with alcoholic beverages. This was not primarily about seeking intoxication, though certainly stronger brews existed for specific occasions. Rather, this reflected something closer to a genuine dietary staple, a beverage consumed much as we might consume plain water today, integrated so thoroughly into daily life that its absence would have seemed genuinely strange to most medieval people. The particular safety this beverage offered stemmed from the brewing process itself, though medieval brewers understood this benefit through practical observation rather than any scientific comprehension of the actual mechanisms involved. Brewing required boiling water as an essential early step, a process that, though undertaken purely to prepare the mixture for fermentation rather than for any deliberate purification purpose, nonetheless eliminated many of the harmful organisms that might otherwise contaminate plain, untreated water drawn from a village well or nearby stream. Beyond this initial boiling, the fermentation process itself introduced additional genuine protection. As yeast consumed the sugars present in the grain mixture, producing alcohol as a byproduct, the resulting environment became considerably less hospitable to many of the harmful organisms capable of causing serious illness in humans. This combination, initial boiling followed by fermentation's own protective qualities, meant that ale and beer, whatever their other qualities, genuinely represented a safer beverage choice than plain water drawn from many medieval sources, particularly in crowded towns where water quality remained genuinely uncertain. There, within a modest medieval household, we might picture this beverage prepared regularly as an essential domestic task, much as we explored regarding bread making or candle production in earlier chapters throughout this long history. A woman managing her household's brewing, working with grain, water, and whatever yeast culture her family maintained, understood through accumulated practical experience precisely how to produce ale that would remain drinkable and, crucially, would not make her family ill. This knowledge passed down through generations much as every other essential domestic skill we have encountered throughout tonight's journey and those preceding it. Consider, too, the particular strength variation that characterized medieval ale and beer production, since not every batch was brewed to the same alcoholic strength. Small beer, sometimes called table beer, represented a considerably weaker brew, low enough in alcohol content that it could reasonably be consumed by children and throughout an entire working day without causing meaningful intoxication, while still offering the genuine safety benefits derived from the brewing process itself. Stronger ales, by contrast, were typically reserved for specific occasions or consumed in more modest quantities, understood even within medieval society as carrying genuine risk of intoxication if consumed too freely. There is something worth pausing on here regarding just how thoroughly this practical safety consideration shaped medieval daily consumption patterns. Consider a medieval laborer working through a demanding physical day, perhaps in the fields or at some skilled trade, drinking small beer steadily throughout his working hours, much as a modern worker might drink water or other beverages. This practice reflecting genuine practical wisdom regarding hydration and safety, rather than any casual disregard for sobriety during working hours. Consider, as well, the particular role monasteries played within this broader brewing tradition, connecting back to patterns we explored during our earlier chapter regarding monastic medicine and herbal knowledge preservation. Many medieval monasteries maintained their own brewing operations, producing ale both for their own community's daily consumption and often for wider distribution to surrounding communities. And monastic brewers, much like the monks we encountered preserving medical manuscripts in earlier chapters, developed and preserved genuine expertise regarding brewing technique, passed carefully through successive generations of monastic practice. There, within a monastery's brewing house, we might picture monks engaged in this careful, patient work, managing large vessels of fermenting grain mash, understanding through accumulated institutional knowledge precisely how long fermentation needed to proceed, how to judge when a particular batch had reached proper readiness. This specialized brewing knowledge representing yet another example of the essential practical wisdom medieval monasteries helped preserve and refine across many generations of careful, patient practice. It is worth considering, too, how this widespread reliance on ale and beer intersected with broader medieval understanding, or genuine misunderstanding, regarding water safety itself. Medieval people generally lacked any scientific framework for understanding why certain water sources caused illness while others did not, relying instead, as we discussed during our previous chapter, on accumulated practical observation regarding water's appearance, smell, and taste. Ale and beer, by contrast, offered a considerably more reliable and consistent safety profile, a fact medieval communities understood through genuine practical experience, even without comprehending the underlying scientific reasons behind this reliability. Consider a medieval traveler passing through unfamiliar territory, genuinely uncertain regarding the safety of local water sources he encountered along his journey, yet able to purchase ale with considerably greater confidence at whatever inn or tavern he happened to stop at, this beverage representing a genuinely more predictable and trustworthy option than gambling on unfamiliar water whose safety he had no reasonable way to assess. This practical consideration likely shaped travel patterns and daily consumption choices throughout medieval society in ways that modern readers, accustomed to reliably safe water virtually everywhere, might not immediately appreciate. There is something worth reflecting on, too, regarding how this pattern extended into other fermented beverages across different regions of medieval Europe, wine serving a genuinely similar function throughout much of southern Europe, where grape cultivation proved more practical than the grain-based brewing more common further north. Wine, much like ale and beer, benefited from a production process that offered genuine, if unintentional, protection against many of the organisms that might otherwise contaminate plain water, and wine similarly found its way into daily consumption patterns throughout Mediterranean and Southern European medieval society in ways that echoed the broader pattern we have explored regarding ale and beer further north. Consider, finally, a medieval household settling into an ordinary evening meal, ale or small beer, served alongside whatever food the family had prepared. This beverage choice reflecting not primarily a pursuit of pleasure or intoxication, but rather a genuinely practical, if imperfectly understood, strategy for managing the persistent uncertainty surrounding water safety that shaped so much of medieval daily life. This pattern, so thoroughly woven into ordinary medieval existence that it likely required little conscious consideration from those living within it, represents a genuinely fascinating example of practical wisdom developing through accumulated experience, long before any scientific understanding existed to explain precisely why this particular solution worked as effectively as it did. As we prepare to leave behind this consideration of ale, beer, and their genuine, if unintentional, contribution to medieval water safety, let us carry forward our appreciation for just how resourcefully medieval communities managed genuine uncertainty regarding one of life's most basic necessities. We turn next toward the Norse world once more, where the particular geography of Scandinavia and Iceland offered communities a genuinely different, often more favorable relationship with clean water than much of medieval Europe further south typically experienced. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the quiet, steady rhythm of that monastery brewing house, its patient work continuing through another ordinary evening, and let yourself drift onward, slowly into the next chapter of this long and peaceful history. Chapter 4: The Norse World's Glacial Streams and Clean Springs. Let us travel north once more, as we have done throughout this long history, into the cold coastal settlements and deep fjords of the Norse world, where the particular geography of Scandinavia and Iceland offered communities a genuinely different, often considerably more favorable relationship with clean water than much of medieval Europe further south typically experienced. Consider, first, the particular advantage this northern landscape provided regarding water access and safety. While much of medieval Europe struggled with the genuine uncertainty surrounding wells and rivers we explored during our earlier chapters, Norse settlements often benefited from an abundance of naturally clean water sources, glacial streams carrying meltwater down from mountain snowfields, natural springs emerging from volcanic rock in Iceland's particular geological circumstances, and mountain lakes fed by this same clean, cold water, rather than by the more contamination-prone lowland sources common throughout much of Europe further south. This genuine advantage stemmed significantly from basic geography and population density. Norse settlements, particularly in Iceland's early period of settlement, existed within a considerably less densely populated landscape than much of medieval Europe, meaning water sources faced considerably less risk of contamination from concentrated human waste, livestock, or the general accumulated pollution that increasingly affected water quality in more crowded medieval towns and cities further south. Glacial streams, in particular, offered water that had traveled directly from melting ice and snow, filtered naturally through rock and soil, before reaching any point where a Norse settlement might draw upon it for daily use. There, along a Norse coastal settlement nestled within a deep fjord, we might picture a clear mountain stream running steadily down from snow-capped peaks above, its water genuinely cold and clean, requiring considerably less of the careful, accumulated caution that medieval European communities had learned to apply toward their own, often less reliable, water sources. Residents drawing water from such a stream could reasonably trust its safety with somewhat greater confidence than their counterparts drawing from a crowded medieval town's central well or a river running through multiple upstream settlements. Consider, too, the particular significance of Iceland's unique volcanic geology within this broader picture, since Iceland's distinctive landscape provided access to naturally heated water in certain locations, geothermal springs, emerging warm or even hot directly from the earth itself, a genuinely remarkable natural resource unavailable throughout most of the rest of medieval Europe. While these geothermal sources served various practical purposes beyond simple drinking water, including bathing and, in some documented instances, cooking, they represented yet another example of how favorable Norse geography could prove regarding water access compared to many other medieval societies we have explored throughout this long history. There is something worth pausing on here regarding how this genuine water abundance shaped Norse settlement patterns themselves. Communities often established their farms and longhouses, which we explored extensively during our earlier chapters regarding Norse winter survival and heating, with careful attention toward proximity to reliable clean water sources, understanding through the same accumulated practical wisdom we have witnessed throughout every culture explored tonight, that water access represented one of the most fundamental considerations in choosing where to build a lasting settlement. Consider a Norse family selecting the location for their longhouse, weighing numerous practical factors we have touched upon throughout earlier chapters: protection from harsh winter winds, access to grazing land for livestock, proximity to the sea for fishing and trade, yet placing genuine importance as well on ensuring reliable access to clean water throughout the year. whether through a nearby stream, spring, or, in regions where such natural sources proved less immediately convenient, through a well dug specifically to reach reliable groundwater, much as we explored regarding medieval European practice. It is worth considering, too, how Norse communities managed water storage and transport within this generally favorable natural context. Water might be carried from source to longhouse in wooden containers, or, particularly along coastal settlements with access to appropriate materials, in vessels crafted from various available materials suited to this practical purpose. This work, much like the water carrying we explored regarding medieval European towns, typically fell to women within Norse households. This essential daily task, woven into the broader pattern of domestic responsibility we have encountered consistently throughout nearly every culture explored during this long history. Consider, as well, the particular challenges Norse communities faced during the depths of winter, when the same cold that helped keep water sources relatively clean throughout warmer months could create its own genuine difficulty, streams and smaller water sources potentially freezing solid, requiring genuine effort to access water that remained readily available during milder seasons. This connects meaningfully to patterns we explored during our earlier chapter regarding Norse winter survival more broadly. Households needing to plan carefully for water access, much as they planned for food storage and heating fuel throughout the demanding winter months. There, during a particularly harsh Norse winter, we might picture household members breaking through ice covering a nearby stream, or careful, practiced work required to access the water flowing steadily beneath this frozen surface layer. This task, representing yet another example of the genuine seasonal labor and careful preparation that characterized Norse winter survival throughout every dimension of daily life we have explored across multiple chapters of this long history. Consider, too, how this generally favorable Norse water situation connected to broader patterns of health and well-being within these communities, a connection reflected in some of the archaeological evidence we touched upon during our earlier chapter regarding Norse medicine and healing practices. While Norse communities certainly faced their own genuine health challenges, as every society throughout this long history inevitably did, the relatively clean water many settlements enjoyed likely contributed positively to overall community health in ways that medieval communities further south, struggling with more contaminated water sources, did not equally benefit from. There is something worth reflecting on here regarding how this particular advantage, water abundance and quality, existed alongside the genuine hardships we explored extensively during earlier chapters regarding Norse winter survival, extreme cold, and near-total polar darkness. Norse communities faced genuine, serious challenges throughout their demanding environment, yet clean water access represented one area where their particular geography offered genuine relative advantage compared to many other medieval societies grappling with the water safety concerns we explored throughout our earlier chapters this evening. Consider, finally, a Norse settlement during a peaceful summer evening. Clear mountain water flowing steadily nearby. This fundamental resource, requiring considerably less of the careful, anxious management that characterized water access throughout much of medieval Europe further south. This genuine advantage, however modest it might have seemed to those simply living within it day to day, represented a meaningful difference in daily experience. One dimension among many where Norse communities navigated their demanding northern environment with a particular combination of genuine challenge and, in this specific instance, genuine natural favor. As we prepare to leave behind this consideration of Norse water sources and their particular geographic advantages, let us carry forward our appreciation for just how significantly basic geography shaped each culture's particular relationship with this most fundamental of human needs. We turn next across the ocean, toward colonial America, where settlers faced their own distinct set of challenges and solutions regarding water access, adapting inherited European knowledge to the genuinely unfamiliar landscape they encountered in this new environment. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the clear, cold flow of that Norse mountain stream, its water running steadily down from snow-capped peaks toward a settlement resting peacefully in the valley below, and let yourself drift onward, slowly, into the next chapter of this long and peaceful history. Chapter 5: Colonial American Wells and the Gathering of Rain. Let us cross the ocean now, as we have done in earlier chapters throughout this long history, traveling from the Norse world toward the farmhouses and modest settlements of colonial America, where settlers faced their own distinct set of challenges regarding water access, adapting inherited European knowledge to a genuinely unfamiliar landscape, while gradually developing new solutions suited to their particular circumstances. Consider, first, the genuine uncertainty colonial settlers faced upon their initial arrival, entirely unfamiliar with local water sources, unable to draw upon generations of accumulated local knowledge regarding which streams ran clean, which lowland areas might harbor genuine danger, which seasonal patterns affected water safety throughout the surrounding region. This uncertainty, we should acknowledge honestly, contributed genuinely to the considerable hardship and mortality many early colonial settlements experienced, particularly during their first difficult years before sufficient practical knowledge had been gathered through hard experience. The Jamestown settlement, among the earliest permanent English colonies in America, offers a particularly clear historical example of just how significant water quality challenges could prove for colonial settlers. Historical records suggest that Jamestown's initial location, chosen primarily for its defensive advantages and deep water access suitable for ocean-going ships, placed the settlement dangerously close to brackish, tidal water considerably less suitable for regular drinking than settlers initially recognized, contributing to genuine illness and hardship during the colony's earliest, most vulnerable years. Consider, though, how colonial communities gradually developed more reliable water access as settlements matured and expanded, drawing significantly on the same fundamental well-digging knowledge we explored during our earlier chapter regarding medieval Europe, adapted now to the particular soil and geological conditions colonial settlers encountered throughout different regions of the growing American colonies. Colonial farmers, much like their medieval European predecessors, learned through accumulated local experience where reliable groundwater might be found, developing genuine practical expertise suited to their specific regional circumstances. There, on a colonial New England farmstead, we might picture a well being dug during a farm's early establishment, workers laboring steadily downward much as we described regarding medieval European well construction, lining the shaft with available stone where possible, working carefully to reach reliable groundwater that would serve the family through the demanding work of establishing their new homestead. This well, once completed, would become as essential to daily colonial farm life as we witnessed regarding medieval village wells, a genuine focal point for daily household water collection, continuing for generations as the farm itself grew and developed. Consider, too, a genuinely significant colonial innovation regarding water access, the widespread practice of collecting rainwater, particularly throughout regions where reliable groundwater proved more difficult to access, or simply as a valuable supplementary source alongside whatever well or stream access a household maintained. Colonial households commonly positioned rain barrels beneath roof edges, capturing runoff during storms. This collected rainwater serving various household purposes, including, in many circumstances, drinking water considered genuinely cleaner than certain alternative local sources. There is something worth pausing on here regarding the particular practical wisdom colonial households developed regarding rainwater collection and use. A colonial family understood, through the same kind of accumulated practical observation we have witnessed throughout every culture explored during this long history, that rainwater collected from a clean roof surface, allowed to settle briefly to remove any debris that might have washed down during collection, often provided genuinely reliable, relatively safe drinking water, particularly valuable during dry periods when other sources might run low or become increasingly concentrated with whatever contamination they typically carried. Consider a colonial farmhouse during a summer thunderstorm. Rain barrels positioned carefully beneath roof edges filling steadily as the storm passed overhead, household members likely feeling genuine practical satisfaction at this natural replenishment of their household water supply. This simple system requiring no digging, no ongoing well maintenance, simply careful positioning and basic collection vessels to capture what nature provided freely during each significant rainfall. It is worth considering, too, how colonial water access connected meaningfully to the broader patterns of seasonal preparation we explored extensively during our earlier chapters regarding food preservation and winter survival throughout colonial America. Households needed to consider water access alongside firewood gathering, food storage, and every other essential seasonal preparation, understanding that winter's genuine cold could freeze wells partially or completely, much as we discussed regarding Norse settlements, requiring careful planning to ensure adequate water access throughout even the coldest months of the year. Consider as well how colonial towns and slightly larger settlements developed their own versions of the shared community water access we explored regarding medieval European villages, town wells or pumps serving multiple households within closer, more urban colonial settlements. This arrangement echoing patterns established many centuries earlier throughout medieval Europe, adapted now to the particular circumstances of these growing colonial American communities. There, within a modest colonial town during its early development, we might picture a central well or pump serving the immediate surrounding households, much as we witnessed regarding medieval village wells, residents gathering here for their daily water collection. This shared resource functioning as a genuine community gathering point, much as it had throughout medieval Europe. Colonial daily life echoing these same fundamental patterns despite the considerable distance, both geographic and temporal, separating these colonial settlements from their medieval European origins. It is worth acknowledging, too, that colonial settlers gradually incorporated genuine practical knowledge borrowed from Native American communities regarding local water sources, much as we explored during our earlier chapter regarding colonial medicine and food preservation. Native American communities, possessing generations of accumulated knowledge regarding the specific landscape colonial settlers found themselves navigating, often provided genuinely valuable guidance regarding reliable local water sources, knowledge that likely helped many colonial settlements avoid at least some of the genuine hardship that uninformed water access decisions might otherwise have caused. Consider, finally, a colonial farmhouse settling into an ordinary evening, its well providing steady, reliable water, much as it had throughout the growing season. Rain barrels standing ready to supplement this supply should dry weather eventually require it. This household's water security representing the accumulated result of careful early planning, hard physical labor, and genuine practical wisdom developed through the same kind of accumulated experience we have witnessed shaping water access throughout every culture and era explored across this long history tonight. As we prepare to leave behind this consideration of colonial wells and rainwater collection, let us carry forward our appreciation for just how thoroughly colonial settlers adapted inherited knowledge while developing genuine new practical wisdom suited to their particular American circumstances. We turn next toward a more focused consideration of exactly what made certain water sources genuinely dangerous throughout this long history, examining the particular illnesses and contamination risks that shaped so much of the careful caution we have witnessed across every era explored tonight. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the steady patter of rain filling a colonial farmhouse's waiting barrels, and let yourself drift onward, slowly, into the next chapter of this long and peaceful history. Chapter 6. Reading the Water. Danger, Illness, and Accumulated Wisdom. Let us pause now before we continue traveling across the remaining chapters of tonight's journey and consider more directly something we have touched upon repeatedly throughout every culture explored so far: the genuine, often invisible danger that contaminated water represented throughout nearly this entire span of human history, and the careful, accumulated wisdom communities developed to navigate this persistent uncertainty without any scientific understanding of what actually caused water to become dangerous. Consider first just how differently people throughout this long history understood illness itself, a topic we explored more fully during our earlier chapter regarding pre-modern medicine. Without any concept of microorganisms, without any framework resembling modern germ theory, communities throughout Rome, medieval Europe, the Norse world, and colonial America necessarily relied on observable, practical patterns rather than any deeper scientific explanation for why certain water sources reliably caused illness while others did not. This practical observation, refined across countless generations, produced genuine, if imperfectly understood, wisdom regarding water safety. Communities learned to distrust water carrying unusual odors, water appearing cloudy or discolored, water drawn from sources situated too closely downstream from settlements, livestock, or other potential sources of contamination. This accumulated knowledge, however lacking in scientific explanation, nonetheless provided genuinely useful practical guidance, since these observable warning signs often did correlate meaningfully with genuine contamination, even without anyone understanding the precise biological mechanisms involved. There, along a medieval river, serving as a community's water source, we might picture an experienced elder examining the water's appearance carefully, following a significant storm, drawing upon decades of accumulated practical observation to judge whether this particular water remained safe for household use, or whether the family should instead rely on stored water or wait for conditions to improve before drawing fresh supplies. This kind of careful, experience-based judgment, passed down through generations much as every other essential practical skill we have explored throughout this long history, represented the primary tool available for managing genuine water safety risk. Consider, too, the particular illnesses that historical records suggest plagued communities throughout this long history, conditions we now understand as typically waterborne, though contemporary understanding attributed them to entirely different causes. Dysentery, characterized by severe digestive illness, appears repeatedly throughout historical records across nearly every era and culture we have explored tonight. Its genuine connection to contaminated water entirely unrecognized by those suffering through its effects, who typically attributed such illness to foul air, imbalanced bodily humors as we explored during our earlier medical history chapter, or various other explanations reflecting the genuine limits of historical medical understanding. It is worth considering, too, how military campaigns throughout history, medieval and otherwise, frequently suffered more casualties from illness, often traceable to contaminated water encountered during extended campaigns, than from actual combat itself. Armies moving through unfamiliar territory, drawing water from whatever sources happened to be available along their route, faced genuine, significant risk from this uncertainty, a pattern that persisted across many centuries and many different military contexts throughout the history we have explored tonight. Consider a medieval military encampment situated near an unfamiliar water source. Soldiers drawing water for cooking and drinking without any reliable way to assess its genuine safety. This uncertainty representing a genuine, serious threat to the army's overall health and effectiveness, quite separate from whatever military engagement they might face from opposing forces. Historical accounts from various medieval campaigns document exactly this pattern. Illness spreading through military encampments in ways that modern understanding readily attributes to contaminated water and inadequate sanitation, though contemporary accounts typically offered entirely different explanations. There is something worth reflecting on here regarding just how thoroughly this genuine uncertainty shaped broader historical patterns beyond simple daily household water use. Trade routes, military campaigns, and long-distance travel throughout this entire history we have explored tonight all depended significantly on travelers' ability to access water sources judged reasonably safe along their journey, a consideration that shaped travel planning, route selection, and daily practical decision-making in ways considerably more significant than most modern travelers need consider today. Consider, too, the particular folk beliefs and practical rituals that developed throughout various cultures regarding water safety, blending genuine practical observation with broader spiritual and cultural understanding, much as we witnessed regarding medieval herbal medicine during our earlier chapter this evening. Certain springs or wells acquired particular reputations, sometimes attributed to saints or other spiritual significance, sometimes simply understood through accumulated community experience as reliably safe or, conversely, as sources to be avoided or approached with particular caution. There, at a medieval well believed to carry particular blessing or protection, we might picture community members drawing water with genuine confidence, this spiritual reputation intertwining, much as we explored regarding medieval medicine more broadly, with whatever practical accumulated experience had actually established this particular source's genuine reliability across many years of community use. This blending of practical and spiritual understanding, appearing consistently throughout nearly every dimension of pre-modern life we have explored across this long history, reflects a worldview considerably less inclined than our own modern perspective to separate practical, empirical observation from broader spiritual and cultural meaning. Consider, as well, how this genuine uncertainty regarding water safety shaped broader patterns of childhood mortality throughout this long history. A somber but genuinely important consideration, given how significantly waterborne illness likely contributed to the tragically high infant and childhood death rates common throughout nearly every era we have explored tonight. Families throughout this history developed whatever practical precautions their accumulated knowledge suggested, boiling water when illness seemed to be spreading through a community, relying preferentially on ale or beer for children, as we explored during our earlier chapter, Yet these precautions, however genuinely helpful, could not fully protect against a threat whose actual biological nature remained entirely unknown. It is worth acknowledging honestly, as we have throughout this long history whenever we encountered genuine historical hardship, that this uncertainty represented genuine tragedy for countless families across countless generations, illness and death arriving through causes that would seem, from our own modern perspective, genuinely preventable through basic modern water treatment and sanitation, yet remaining entirely mysterious and unavoidable to those actually living through these historical circumstances. Consider, finally, how this accumulated practical wisdom, imperfect and incomplete as it necessarily remained, nonetheless represented genuine human ingenuity and care. Communities across every culture we have explored tonight, developing whatever practical strategies their circumstances and accumulated experience allowed, protecting their families as best they could against a threat they could observe and respond to, even without ever truly understanding its actual underlying nature. As we prepare to leave behind this more somber consideration of water's genuine historical dangers, let us carry forward our appreciation for the careful, accumulated wisdom that helped communities throughout this long history navigate genuine uncertainty with whatever practical tools their particular era provided. We turn next toward the specific filtering and purification methods various cultures developed. Imperfect as these methods necessarily remained without modern scientific understanding, yet representing genuine, thoughtful attempts to improve water safety through practical means. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the quiet, careful watchfulness of that experienced elder examining river water after a storm, and let yourself drift onward, slowly, into the next chapter of this long and peaceful history. Chapter 7: Sand, Cloth, and the Earliest Filters. Let us turn our attention now towards something genuinely worth appreciating within this long history: the various practical methods different cultures developed to improve water quality before consumption. Imperfect and incomplete as these methods necessarily remained without any scientific understanding of what precisely they were removing or why they actually worked. Consider, first, one of the simplest and most widely practiced methods available throughout nearly every culture we have explored tonight: the straightforward practice of allowing collected water to settle before use. This required nothing beyond patience and an appropriate container, water drawn from a river or other source containing visible sediment left undisturbed for some hours, allowing heavier particles to gradually sink toward the bottom, leaving considerably clearer water available near the surface for careful pouring or ladling away from the settled sediment below. There, within a modest household throughout nearly any era we have explored this evening, we might picture a simple clay or wooden vessel positioned quietly in a corner, freshly collected water resting undisturbed, a household member returning some hours later to carefully draw off the clearer water above, while leaving whatever sediment had settled safely undisturbed at the container's base. This simple practice, requiring no special knowledge beyond basic observation, likely represented one of the most universally practiced water treatment methods throughout this entire long history, appearing independently across cultures with little direct connection to one another. Consider, too, the practice of straining water through cloth, another remarkably simple yet genuinely effective method for removing visible particles and debris before water was used for cooking or drinking. A household might keep a piece of clean linen or wool cloth specifically for this purpose, water poured carefully through this fabric into a waiting vessel, the cloth catching whatever visible sediment or debris the water carried, providing noticeably clearer water than what had gone into the straining process. There is something worth pausing on here, regarding just how widely this simple technique appears throughout historical records across genuinely different cultures and eras. Roman households, medieval European families, colonial American settlers, all developed some version of this basic straining practice, suggesting a kind of universal, independently discovered practical wisdom regarding the genuine value of physically filtering visible impurities from water before use, even without any deeper understanding of what additional, invisible contamination such simple filtering could not actually address. Consider, as well, a somewhat more elaborate filtering method that developed in various forms throughout different cultures, filtering water through layers of sand and gravel, a technique that, while still lacking any scientific understanding of microbiological contamination, nonetheless provided genuinely superior filtration compared to simple cloth straining alone. Sand filtration worked by forcing water to pass slowly through successive layers of increasingly fine material, larger gravel first, then progressively finer sand. This gradual passage, removing considerably more suspended particles than cloth alone typically managed. There, within a slightly more elaborate household or community water system, we might picture a simple constructed filter, perhaps a large clay vessel or wooden container, layered carefully with gravel and sand, water poured in at the top and allowed to seep slowly downward through these layers before emerging, noticeably clearer, from an opening near the base. This construction required somewhat more deliberate effort and understanding than simple cloth straining, yet remained well within the practical capability of ordinary households throughout much of this long history, wherever appropriate materials happened to be available. It is worth considering, too, how boiling water, which we touched upon during our earlier chapter regarding ale and beer production, represented perhaps the single most genuinely effective purification method available throughout this entire history, even though the communities practicing it typically understood its benefit through practical experience rather than any scientific comprehension of how heat actually eliminated harmful organisms. Water boiled for cooking, or specifically boiled when illness seemed to be spreading through a community, genuinely benefited from this simple process, even without anyone involved understanding precisely why boiled water so often proved safer than water consumed directly from its original source. Consider a household during a period of genuine local concern regarding water safety, perhaps following reports of illness spreading through a nearby community, choosing deliberately to boil their water before drinking. This practical precaution, reflecting accumulated wisdom regarding boiling's genuine protective benefit, even though the actual scientific explanation for this benefit remained entirely unknown to those practicing this careful precaution. Consider, too, certain more specialized filtering approaches that developed within particular cultural and geographic contexts throughout this long history. Charcoal, understood through practical observation to improve water's taste and reduce certain unpleasant qualities, found use in various filtering applications across different cultures. Water passed through layers of charcoal alongside sand and gravel. This combination providing somewhat more sophisticated filtration than any single material alone typically achieved. There, within a household employing this more elaborate filtering approach, we might picture careful, deliberate construction, layers arranged with genuine attention toward achieving the clearest, best-tasting water this combination of available materials could reasonably provide. This effort reflecting genuine practical ingenuity applied toward one of life's most fundamental necessities, even without any scientific framework to guide or validate these practical choices beyond simple observed results. It is worth acknowledging honestly, as we have throughout this long history whenever considering historical practices through our own modern scientific understanding, that these various filtering methods, however genuinely helpful in removing visible sediment and improving water's taste and appearance, could not actually eliminate the invisible microbiological contamination that represented the genuine, serious danger within much historical water. Sand, cloth, and even charcoal filtration, while providing real, meaningful improvement, offered nothing resembling the reliable protection that boiling, or eventually, modern water treatment methods would provide. Consider, though, how this genuine limitation does not diminish the real, practical value these methods provided throughout this long history. Even partial improvement, even the genuine benefit of removing visible sediment and improving water's taste and appearance, represented meaningful practical value to households throughout every era we have explored tonight. This accumulated wisdom reflecting genuine human ingenuity and care applied toward managing uncertainty with whatever practical tools and understanding their particular historical moment actually provided. Consider, finally, a household throughout nearly any era or culture explored across this long history, engaged in whatever combination of settling, straining, and perhaps more elaborate filtering their particular circumstances and accumulated local knowledge suggested, this careful, patient work representing genuine practical wisdom applied toward one of humanity's most basic and essential needs. Imperfect as this wisdom necessarily remained without the scientific understanding that would eventually transform water safety far beyond what any historical filtering method could actually achieve. As we prepare to leave behind this consideration of historical filtering and purification methods, let us carry forward our appreciation for the genuine practical ingenuity these techniques represented, however incomplete their actual protective benefit ultimately proved to be. We turn next toward a broader reflection on how water access and management shaped daily rhythm, settlement patterns, and community structure across every culture we have explored throughout tonight's long journey. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the quiet, patient work of water, slowly seeping through careful layers of sand and gravel, clearing gradually as it descends, and let yourself drift onward, slowly, into the next chapter of this long and peaceful history. Chapter 8: Rivers, Mills, and the Growth of Settlements. Let us broaden our view now, stepping back from the particular filtering methods and specific water sources we have examined throughout tonight's earlier chapters, to consider something equally significant: how access to water itself, in its many forms across every culture we have explored, fundamentally shaped where communities chose to settle, how they organized their daily and seasonal labor, and how water became woven into the very structure of commerce and community life. Consider, first, just how thoroughly water access determined settlement location throughout nearly this entire span of human history. A community establishing itself anywhere, whether ancient Rome expanding along the Tiber, medieval villages clustering near reliable springs, Norse families choosing fjordside locations near clean glacial streams, or colonial settlers selecting farmland near dependable wells, weighed water access as perhaps the single most fundamental consideration in choosing where to build a lasting home. Fertile soil mattered, defensibility mattered, proximity to trade routes mattered, yet none of these considerations held any real value without reliable water nearby to sustain the people who would actually live there. There, along a river bend somewhere in medieval Europe, we might picture a small settlement gradually growing over generations, its original founders having chosen this particular location specifically for the river's reliable flow, a decision made perhaps centuries earlier that continued shaping the community's daily life long after those original founders had passed. The river provided drinking water, certainly, but also served purposes we have not yet fully explored tonight. Purposes that connected water access directly to a community's broader economic and practical life. Consider, specifically, the mill, one of the most significant ways flowing water served medieval communities beyond simple drinking supply. Water mills, positioned along rivers and streams with sufficient flow to turn a mill wheel, provided essential mechanical power for grinding grain into flour, a task that, without such mechanical assistance, required considerable manual labor using hand-operated stones. The mill represented genuine technological sophistication for its era, water's natural flowing energy harnessed to accomplish essential daily work that would otherwise demand exhausting human effort. There, beside a medieval river, we might picture a mill standing at the water's edge, its great wheel turning steadily as the current pushed against it. This motion transferred through a system of gears to turn heavy grinding stones within the mill building itself. Farmers throughout the surrounding countryside would bring their harvested grain here, the miller processing it into flour in exchange for a portion of the grain itself. This arrangement representing an essential economic relationship built entirely around the community's access to reliably flowing water. Consider, too, how this same water that turned mill wheels and filled village wells also served as essential transportation infrastructure throughout much of this long history. Rivers connected communities in ways overland travel, considerably slower and more physically demanding, simply could not match. Goods, news, and travelers moved along river systems throughout medieval Europe, throughout the Norse world's extensive network of fjords and coastal waterways, throughout colonial America's river valleys that often determined where new settlements would establish themselves as colonial expansion continued. There is something worth pausing on here regarding just how thoroughly this transportation function shaped broader historical development throughout every culture we have explored tonight. Trade goods moved along rivers considerably more efficiently than overland alternatives allowed, connecting distant communities in ways that would have proven genuinely difficult to achieve otherwise. Roman engineers understood this principle well, often positioning new settlements deliberately along navigable waterways, while medieval trading towns frequently developed specifically at points where river transportation intersected with overland trade routes, creating natural commercial hubs shaped fundamentally by water access. Consider a Viking longship, which we have not yet discussed extensively during tonight's journey, though it connects meaningfully to patterns explored throughout our earlier chapters regarding Norse settlement and daily life. Norse communities relied significantly on their extensive network of fjords and coastal waterways for both fishing and trade, their genuinely sophisticated shipbuilding technology allowing movement along these water routes with a skill and efficiency that supported trade connections extending remarkably far beyond what overland travel alone could have achieved throughout this same historical period. It is worth considering, too, how water access shaped agricultural practice itself throughout every culture explored during this long history. Irrigation representing yet another essential dimension of water's role beyond simple drinking supply. Communities throughout drier regions, though this particular concern proved less significant throughout much of the wetter climates we have primarily explored tonight, developed careful systems for directing water toward agricultural fields, ensuring crops received adequate moisture even during periods when natural rainfall alone might prove insufficient. Consider, as well, how this fundamental relationship between water and settlement created genuine vulnerability throughout this long history whenever water access became disrupted or compromised. A community whose well ran dry, whose river changed course through natural processes, or whose water source became contaminated through whatever cause, faced genuine, sometimes existential challenge, potentially requiring the difficult decision to relocate entirely, abandoning homes and agricultural land that generations of accumulated labor had established, simply because the fundamental water access that had originally justified the settlement's location no longer proved reliable. There, within a community facing exactly this kind of genuine crisis, perhaps a well that had reliably served for generations, suddenly running dry during an unusually severe drought, we might picture the genuine anxiety and difficult practical decisions this situation would require. Households weighing whether to dig an entirely new well at considerable effort and uncertain success, whether to rely increasingly on water carried from more distant sources, or, in the most severe circumstances, whether the entire community might need to consider relocation. This fundamental vulnerability reflecting just how completely water access underpinned every other dimension of settled community life throughout this long history. Consider, finally, how this deep, foundational relationship between water and human settlement connects meaningfully to nearly every other chapter we have explored throughout tonight's long journey, and indeed throughout the broader history of human survival and daily life we have traced across multiple evenings together. Food preservation depended on water for various preparation processes. Heating and daily domestic labor required water for cooking and cleaning. Medicine, as we explored during earlier chapters, often incorporated water directly into various herbal preparations and treatments. Water, in this sense, represents perhaps the single most fundamental thread connecting every other dimension of pre-modern daily life we have examined together across this long, patient history. As we prepare to leave behind this broader consideration of water's role in shaping settlement, trade, and community structure, let us carry forward our appreciation for just how thoroughly this single essential resource influenced nearly every other dimension of human historical experience. We turn next toward our final substantive reflection this evening, considering how this entire long history of water access and management connects to broader themes of community cooperation and shared responsibility that we have witnessed consistently throughout every culture explored tonight. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the steady, patient turning of that medieval mill wheel, water flowing endlessly past as it has for generations, and let yourself drift onward, slowly, into the next chapter of this long and peaceful history. Chapter 9. Shared Wells, Shared Responsibility. Let us consider now, in this final substantive chapter of tonight's journey, something that has quietly run beneath every culture and every water source we have explored throughout this long history: the genuine, essential cooperation that water access required from nearly every community we have visited. A cooperation that reveals something meaningful about how deeply survival itself depended on people working together, rather than managing this fundamental need alone. Consider, first, just how rarely water access throughout this history remained a purely private, individual matter. A Roman household drew from a public fountain shared with an entire neighborhood. A medieval family relied on a village well maintained through collective community effort. A Norse settlement depended on streams and springs whose continued cleanliness benefited from every household's careful, shared stewardship. A colonial town's central well served multiple families whose ongoing cooperation determined whether this shared resource remained safe and reliable for everyone depending upon it. This pattern of shared responsibility required genuine, ongoing community effort that we have touched upon throughout earlier chapters without perhaps fully appreciating its significance. A village well needed periodic cleaning, careful protection from contamination, and collective agreement regarding appropriate use. Considerations that no single household could manage alone, but that required genuine cooperation among everyone who depended on this shared resource for their family's basic survival. There, within a medieval village managing exactly this kind of collective responsibility, we might picture community members gathering periodically to address well maintenance, perhaps clearing debris that had accumulated, repairing stonework that had begun deteriorating, establishing or reaffirming shared understanding regarding appropriate practices, keeping livestock away from the immediate well area, avoiding activities that might introduce contamination. This collective governance representing genuine, practical community cooperation built entirely around ensuring everyone's continued access to safe water. Consider, too, how this necessary cooperation extended into broader community structures we might not immediately associate with water access. Many medieval towns developed specific regulations regarding water use and protection, authorities establishing rules meant to protect shared water sources from contamination, much as we explored regarding curfew practices protecting communities from fire risk during our earlier chapter this evening. This regulatory impulse reflected genuine, practical wisdom regarding water's essential, shared importance, communities understanding intuitively that individual carelessness could genuinely endanger everyone depending on a shared source. It is worth considering, too, how this pattern of shared water responsibility connected meaningfully to broader themes of community trust we have witnessed throughout nearly every chapter of this long history. The water carrier we discussed during our earlier chapter regarding medieval villages required genuine community trust regarding his honesty and judgment. The miller depended on trust from farmers throughout the surrounding countryside. Even the simple act of drawing water from a shared well required a kind of implicit trust that neighbors were maintaining appropriate standards, not introducing contamination through careless or inconsiderate behavior. Consider a medieval community where this trust had been genuinely earned and maintained across generations, neighbors drawing from their shared well with confidence built through accumulated experience, understanding that this resource had remained reliable precisely because the entire community understood and respected their shared responsibility toward its protection. This kind of community trust, difficult to build and genuinely valuable once established, represents something worth appreciating as we consider this long history of shared water access. There is something worth reflecting on here regarding how this pattern of necessary cooperation connects to the broader themes we have explored across multiple evenings together throughout this extended history. Just as households cooperated during the autumn slaughter and preservation season we explored during our very first journey together, just as communities gathered to help with harvest and firewood collection during winter preparation, water access similarly required this same fundamental pattern of shared labor and mutual responsibility. Communities throughout every culture we have explored, recognizing intuitively that certain essential needs simply could not be met through purely individual effort alone. Consider, too, how this necessary cooperation sometimes required genuine conflict resolution when disputes inevitably arose regarding water access and use. Medieval legal records occasionally document disputes between neighboring communities regarding water rights, particularly along shared streams or rivers where one community's use might genuinely affect water availability or quality for others situated further downstream. These disputes, while representing genuine conflict rather than smooth cooperation, nonetheless reflect just how seriously communities throughout this history took their water access, understanding intuitively that this resource represented something worth genuine effort and attention to protect and preserve. Consider, finally, how this entire pattern of shared responsibility and community cooperation around water access reflects something genuinely meaningful about human historical experience more broadly. Throughout every culture and era we have explored across this long history, from ancient Rome through colonial America, communities recognized that certain fundamental needs required cooperation rather than pure individual self-reliance. Water representing perhaps the clearest, most universal example of this essential truth. No household, however wealthy or resourceful, could reasonably manage water access entirely alone across an entire lifetime, and this genuine interdependence helped shape communities bound together not merely by proximity or convenience, but by genuine, essential mutual need. As we prepare to bring tonight's exploration of water's long history toward its gentle conclusion, let us carry forward our appreciation for just how thoroughly this fundamental resource shaped not only individual daily life, but the deeper structures of cooperation and community that sustained human settlement throughout every culture we have explored together tonight. Rest for a moment, if you wish, in the quiet, patient cooperation of neighbors gathered around a shared well, their collective care sustaining something essential for every household depending upon it, and let yourself drift onward, slowly, into the final, closing chapter of this long and peaceful history. Closing chapter, the quiet sound of flowing water. Let us imagine, one final time tonight, a community gathered from every era we have explored throughout this long journey, drawn together around water in its many forms: a Roman public fountain, a medieval village well, a Norse glacial stream, a colonial rain barrel, each representing the same fundamental human need met through whatever particular solution a given time and place allowed. Picture this composite scene settling into evening, the day's water collection complete, households throughout this gathered community having drawn what they needed to carry them through until morning would bring this same essential task once again. Somewhere within this scene, a Roman aqueduct continues its silent, steady flow, carrying water across great distances exactly as it has for centuries. Somewhere else, a medieval well stands quiet in darkness, its stone walls holding the day's accumulated warmth. A Norse stream continues its endless movement down from distant mountains, and a colonial rain barrel sits patiently, ready for whatever the next storm might bring. We have traveled a considerable distance together tonight, across many centuries and many different landscapes, yet one truth has remained remarkably constant throughout this entire journey. Water, in every era we have explored, represented something genuinely precious, something requiring careful attention, patient labor, and, perhaps most significantly, genuine community cooperation to access safely and reliably. Beneath every particular solution we have examined, Roman engineering, medieval wells, Norse streams, colonial rain collection, lies something worth carrying forward as we bring this long evening toward its close. Every strategy depended upon careful observation, accumulated wisdom passed between generations, and a fundamental understanding that this most basic of human needs could not be taken for granted, could not be assumed, but required constant, patient attention. Consider, one final time, how differently we might now regard something as simple as a glass of water, understanding, even briefly, the genuine history of effort, uncertainty, and careful accumulated wisdom that once stood behind this most basic necessity. Every culture we have explored tonight approached this same fundamental challenge with whatever tools, knowledge, and community cooperation their particular circumstances allowed, and their collective effort, spanning centuries and continents, gradually built toward the reliable, safe water access so many of us now experience without a second thought. Let your own body settle now, fully and completely, trusting, as countless generations before you have trusted, in whatever water sustained them through each ordinary day, however uncertain or carefully managed that access might have been. There is no need to hold on to any particular detail from tonight's journey. Let it all settle gently now, alongside you, as you drift toward your own well-earned rest. Thank you for spending this time with Velaris Sleep tonight. Let the steady flow of that ancient Roman aqueduct, the quiet stillness of a medieval village well, the clear rush of a Norse mountain stream, and the patient gathering of colonial rainwater all carry you gently now into your own deep, restful, peaceful sleep.